listen to if you're not available. Okay, so let's get started. My slide doesn't want to change. There it goes. So just very quickly, I'm going to give you the outline to let you know that it is a folio and you are going to create a unit of work. So the 5 lessons for either a foundation to year 2 class, a 3-4 class, or a 5-6 class. I recommend probably choosing a specific grade level, because even though it's sort of grouped them into particular categories, imagine yourself in a classroom and choose a level, because if you're looking at foundation, you're going to need to choose specific content descriptors for foundation. So you can't be saying that it's foundation to year 2. It's quite a large range. So just choose a specific level and tell us exactly which level you're going to be choosing. It's wonderful that we've got this whole scope of primary school there, so you can choose something you're interested in, something you maybe know a lot about already. Maybe you've done a prac in a particular year level and you want to use some stuff that you've already got, or ideas you've already got, or you could go the complete opposite where you choose something that you're not very well versed in, perhaps a level that you don't know anything about and you want to learn more and have more skills under your belt, I suppose. So your choice is completely up to you. Your unit of work is going to provide you with the opportunity to work within the 3 strands. So you're going to cover something from language, something from literacy, and something from literature in the national or your own state curriculum if you prefer. I know, for example, with us here in Victoria, you might prefer to use Vic Curric, because that would be something that you would actually then use in your classroom in Victoria. There would be no point in planning to the AC because we don't use it here. We don't have this, we do have language, literacy and literature, so that would remain the same. I'm not sure about all of the states, so if you have questions about curriculum, just whip them in the DB and we'll make sure we get answers to you about that. You will need to compare and evaluate strategies and resources designed for the teaching of English. So we're going to talk about planning, we're going to talk about pedagogy, we're going to talk about assessment, and we're all relating that back to curriculum. All right, so what's Rachel's top 5 things that you need to know to get started? Well, my number 1 is to connect with the Australian curriculum / your own state curriculum. Now, there's no right or wrong about what particular curriculum you choose. I know that we've been analysing the Australian curriculum all of this time, so if you feel more comfortable just sticking with the Australian curriculum because you feel like you've got a bit of an insight into it now, then do that. It's completely up to you. Now, the reason why I've decided to mention this, there's not a really strong curriculum focus in the assessment details, so I just wanted to make sure that I talk about it now to show really how important it is and how it can sort of make or break a unit in terms of how effective it is and how it's going to meet the needs of the learners. And we do need to do a reflection. So we're going to be talking about how our unit has met the needs of the students. So curriculum's number 1. And this is from my advice from reading lots and lots of units over the past, many TPs I've been in this particular unit. So what I've noticed over the time is that we'll have students who can come up with some absolutely amazing units. I remember reading one once that was quite science-based. I think it was about water and environment and sustainability and lots of different areas like that, which are all fantastic. You could absolutely design a literacy unit and had some sort of sustainability flavour to it, or you could link in other sort of subject areas. But what was happening was the actual literacy itself was getting lost and it was becoming a science unit or a history unit. So my first word of advice is, this is literacy. We have to be teaching the literacy outcomes first and foremost. You can have flavours and other ideas woven in, but make sure that you're always connecting back to literacy and keep your literacy content descriptors in mind. That's my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is start with the curriculum. I absolutely love it when students get all excited about resources and about things that they know. So for example, someone might be really super excited because they've got a particular book in mind, or someone might be excited to say, oh, I love this video, I'm going to design my unit of work using this video and using this big book. Now that's a great way to go, because you do need to link to resources, but the problem is it's really super hard to think about what your unit's going to be and get ideas on your unit and then say, I've got my unit around this particular big book and now I'm going to try and fit my curriculum into that. It's much, much better to go the other way around. Start with your curriculum outcomes first and then choose resources that fit. Then choose rich text that fit. Then choose videos that fit. Then choose, your tasks that fit. So start with the curriculum first. It's a very, very important tip. So you're going to choose your year level and you're going to look through to find one literature, one language, and one literacy curriculum content descriptor that you are going to teach to. And then you're going to do your planning from there. Now, it's really, really important that you understand your curriculum content descriptors. And some of them are horrendous. Some of them are so wordy and full of jargon and you just don't know what they're talking about. So A, ask your ELA if you're not sure, but B, click on the elaboration. The elaborations in the Australian curriculum are great because they just break down exactly into a little bit more layman's terms about what exactly it means in each of the content descriptors. So in my little example here, I've chosen some, I've just forgotten off the top of my head. I think they're from grade 4 part of the curriculum. So I've got examining literature and I've got language for interaction. So this is what I want to base my unit around. So the idea that we examine text. So these are both reading outcomes because my unit of work is going to be about reading primarily. I'm going to design a reading unit. Discuss how language is used to describe the settings in text and explore. Oh, I must have cut off a little bit there. So we've got settings in text. So we're going to look at the settings and analyze why authors have particular settings. And we're going to discuss the nature and effects of some language devices used to enhance meaning and shape a reader's reaction. So these are not writing outcomes. These are not us using language devices. This is us exploring why an author has used particular language devices. If you're not sure what a language device is, that's when you check on the elaboration. That's when you Google. That's when you come to us and ask. So when we're having a look at language devices, we really need some sort of really rich text where an author has used these particular strategies explicitly, because I know when I get to my pedagogy, I need to model this. I know when I get to my sort of group work that I want kids exploring some really good text around language devices and how an author has built up some sort of visual imagery about what they want us to feel about the setting, about the characters. I'm also going to have a look at vocab because obviously if you're talking about language devices, rich vocab in a text is very, very important, and using that sort of evaluative language that authors can use to sort of shape the way we picture a story. So this unit of work that I'm going to design in my little example, and again we'll talk about it more in the interactive collab, it would be focused on the writing of the author and students really using some really great texts from really great authors to model what good writing looks like for us and how they use imagery, evaluative language and devices to, really get us to visualize and really get us to make a scene of what's happening, and it's going to improve comprehension overall for our students too. So grab the curriculum, choose a level, and choose 3 outcomes that you think you can teach to. They need to be outcomes that go together. So, for example, if my focus is language devices, I wouldn't want to have a random content descriptor that talked about my students learning handwriting or punctuation, because that's got nothing to do with my unit. You're going to hear me use the word align a lot in this collab and in the interactive collab because everything needs to align. If I'm talking about language devices in my unit, I need a reading assessment that looks at this sort of rich comprehension. I need my unit plan, my series of 5 lessons to flow and align with my content descriptors. So I can't have a lesson about writing shoved in my reading unit that doesn't make sense with my content descriptors. Again, this is very involved and we will talk about it more in the interactive collab. But step 1, grab your curriculum and grab some outcomes and, play around with it. Look, have a think about which ones you want to do and then choose wisely. Make sure they're ones that you're interested in. Then step 2 is to choose the content. Then you go get the books and the videos and the templates and the things that are going to make your lessons what they are. Once you've got your curriculum under control and you understand your content descriptors, then you can base your unit around it. So for example, if I was doing language devices and sort of visual imagery, I would choose a rich text. Now we've used the Sweet as Fig before because I teach grade 3 at the moment, and we've used that because it has a lot of that rich language. We've also had a look at Margaret Wild's book Fox, mixing up my authors there, because that has a lot of imagery that we could analyze. So we go off and look for things, talk with other people, ask teachers you might know, ask us. All of your ELAs are experienced teachers, so get advice from them about, I want to plan a reading unit around looking at authors and how they, get us to visualize when we're reading. How do they use those language devices to provide that sort of rich picture in your head of what you're reading? Ask, get ideas, share on the DB with other students. Does anyone know of any good things I can use for my writing unit? Does anyone have any good ideas for this reading? I've got this foundation reading. It's all about, phonological awareness or phonemic awareness. Does anyone have any ideas about that? So, it's going to look very, very different from what it does at foundation to what it does at grade 6. So, it'd be great, to share ideas, talk to people, and really think about what resources you're going to use. So the curriculum is your what. It's the what of what you're teaching. And the pedagogy is the how. Now in our unit plan, so we've done it. I'm going to talk more about the introduction and the actual formal setting of how to set out your unit when we get to the interactive collab, because I just can't possibly cover everything now. But in your unit plan as such, you need to touch on not only things like unit objectives, which is essentially learning intentions and success criteria, but you're going to have a look at pedagogical approaches. And in the unit assessment details, it says e.g. strategies, tools and groupings of children, etc. So your pedagogy is the how of what you're teaching. Now, to make your unit really strong and to be pushing your grade level up into that HD side, if I saw a unit of work and all it said was, let's group the children and let's do some collaboration, that probably wouldn't be strong enough. This is a literacy unit. Use literacy-based pedagogy. So use things like modeled reading, shared reading, guided reading, independent reading, reciprocal reading, literacy circles, buddy reading, and then the writing side, you use things like interactive writing, shared writing, modeled writing, independent writing. I'm sure I'm missing ones there, but if you go to the literacy toolkit, it will tell you all of the different strategies for writing. But you have to use literacy pedagogy. It is a literacy unit. So if we went through your whole unit and didn't find any mention of any of those things, I would be concerned, because I wouldn't want someone in my classroom teaching without any of those strategies being used. So really focus on getting your literacy pedagogy down and choose one that suits what you're doing. If I am in my grade 3 class and I'm introducing the kids to language devices and I want them to model what I'm doing, I'm going to use a modeled reading lesson, and I'm going to be really explicit about what I then want my children to go and do. So use modelled reading if it suits what you're going to be doing. Now, if they're fairly familiar with language devices, or perhaps in the early stages of your unit, you set them up with some modelled lessons where they're using worked examples, they're using that specific guidance, visual thinking strategies, annotations. They're doing all of that with really explicit teaching from the teacher. In the middle sort of part of the unit, you might then, following that gradual release model, you might suggest that there's sort of some more guided groups or independent tasks, because the kids have got a handle on what it is that you want to teach them by then, and then you're giving the responsibility back to them. So as well as having things like, we want to see collaborating, we want to see visual thinking strategies used, we want to see, things like, there could be some turn and talk, or there could be some flexible groupings or things like that. It doesn't mean that you've got it. This is not something that you then go away and think, oh, Rachel said to use that, and then try and squish in all of those things. They're just merely examples, and you don't squish things in just for the sake of it because you think, oh, I'll just squish another pedagogical approach in there. Only choose ones that align with what you're trying to achieve and actually enhance the lesson. Because when you come to write your reflection, you'll say, you'll go to the academic research about modelling and modelled approaches to reading and how that sets the children up for being able to find out exactly what they need to do. And then they move into a guided group. You can talk about why you chose that and why it fit in with what you were trying to achieve. But obviously you'll have some collaboration and some other things as well. So that's pedagogy. Again, a bit of a big umbrella. We will talk again about that and how it can look within, I think, a few more specific ideas when we come to our interactive collab. The other main thing that you need to know is assessment, because in your assessment details, it says an assessment plan for the unit needs to be included, including record keeping and report strategies. This should align with the unit objectives, hence the word align again. Consider how to cater for diversity and inclusive approaches. So assessment is super important, and assessment is going to be important. We really think about imagining ourselves using this in the classroom. We need to know what the kids know before, during, and after. And we need to make sure that we have that mix of both formative and summative assessment over the unit. Now, you're suggesting specific tools. Don't just tell us I'm going to use a formative approach. That's too broad. You need to choose and give us specific things. This is, imagine yourself in the classroom. You can't just say, kids, we're doing a formative assessment. What does that mean? What are they doing? What's going to give you the information that's going to drive your teaching into the next lesson and into the next lesson? How are you going to keep up with how the kids are traveling? If it was a real life unit and we were teaching this tomorrow, we wouldn't want to get to week 5 and notice that so many kids didn't understand what we were doing, and we didn't have those sort of like check-ins or little assessment points of, formative assessment mainly throughout the unit, checking in with certain kids and making sure that, we can make adjustments to our teaching. We never teach to a unit plan specifically when we're teaching in the classroom. You might plan out the 5 weeks, but, by week 3, you might realize that you have to make changes or you have to do things to suit certain kids. So assessment is very, very important. Now, when I keep saying that word align, your assessment strategies have to align with your content descriptors. So if you're telling me that your unit is about punctuation, your assessment strategies have to have an element of punctuation to it. Obviously, it's going to be a writing assessment, but it can't be a writing assessment of something else. It needs to be a writing assessment that encompasses punctuation somehow. If it's a reading unit, it has to be a reading assessment. If it's a spelling unit, it has to be a spelling assessment. If it's a grammar unit, it has to be a grammar assessment. If it's a speaking and listening unit, it has to be a speaking and listening assessment. So that's what we mean by align. Everything matches up and makes sense together. So before, what assessments have been put in place prior to starting the unit. So how are we going to know what the kids know? How are we going to know what, is going to help us get this unit started? Is there any student background knowledge? Use a curriculum to help you with this. So if I know that I want to teach language devices at grade 4, is this the first time they've ever dealt with language devices? Is it in the curriculum at grade 3? Is it in the curriculum at grade 2? Or is this the first time that they're coming across it? That will give you insight into what prior knowledge kids have already got, depending on what they've been taught the year before. But this is a particular grade, and we know that all kids are different and not everyone's just learning at grade 4 level. So what assessments are we going to put in place prior to the unit beginning to check in with the kids? Now, it doesn't mean that we've got to give them a super long test with lots of questions and, have them, a specialised, standardised test. I mean, it does say that we need to include some summative assessment somewhere. So you may choose to do it beforehand, as long as it's providing you data with how you're going to start your unit, so that you know where the kids are up to. So if that means that you have to do an F&P at the start of the unit to get groups worked out, that's what you suggest. If it means that you have to do some sort of comprehension test because you've got a comprehension-based unit, then you could do it. During the unit is where I like to use some of those more formative approaches, because they help you, like I said, do those check-ins, just find out where the kids are at. And it's not overly taxing, and it's not overly, I suppose that, rigor, like sort of demanding or taking up a lot of your time. You can't do 30 F&Ps in the middle of a unit. So you can do some formative approaches to sort of gauge how kids are going during the lessons. So you could use things like, something as simple as a thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs in the middle in your lesson. That's a formative approach. So if you have asked the kids to do a shared writing and you want to talk about audience, you say to the kids at the end of that lesson, how do you feel about audience now? And they'll give you a thumbs up and thumbs down. That could just be a very, very simple formative assessment used in the middle of a lesson. Or, people have mini whiteboards where they ask the kids a question and they get the kids to hold up a little mini whiteboard and they have a look at all the sea of mini whiteboards and just gauge how kids are going. There's lots of, if you Google formative assessment strategies in education, lots of them pop up. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to find one specific to literacy, like thumbs up, thumbs down could be used in any kind of lesson, but it's where you use it and how it's providing you information about how the kids are going with literacy concepts. At the end of the unit, you probably should suggest something that's going to be assessing the learning intentions and the rationale of the unit. So what are the aims and objectives of the unit? How are you going to know if your teaching has succeeded and been successful with what your initial learning intentions and whole sort of point of the unit was? If I want to teach my kids about language devices, do they now know how to identify language devices and how the author is creating a mood in terms of audience by the end of this unit? Again, it's another very big topic, and when we show you some examples, I'm going to try and put together some unit plans and things for people to have a look at in the interactive collab, and we'll look at how these particular students got their assessment strategies to align with their content descriptors and learning intentions, and then this succession of lessons made sense and their assessment drove their teaching within the unit. All right, now it's a very, very small little word in, and I almost missed it, to be honest, because it says consider how to cater for diversity and inclusive approaches, and it's a very, very small part of a sentence within the, what did they call it, the unit plan. But it's actually quite a large part of the rubric. So my advice very, very, very early on, which means now, is to reflect on diverse learners. Please, please, please don't skip this bit out, because from what let me check, I think it's worth 30% of your mark. Let me check, 25%? 20%, but still a big chunk. 20% of your mark goes to the connection to inclusive methods of teaching and learning for the whole class. And what that means, I just got a paper cut, to be inclusive. So basically, don't think too broadly, don't think too specifically, don't think about special needs as such. So you don't have to say, if I had an ADHD child, I would do this. If I had an autistic child, I would do this. You don't have to be so specific in meeting. Obviously, there will be special needs children in your class, and in a different unit that focuses on diversity, you'd probably delve into that a little bit more. But remember, our focus here is on literacy, and it's just on differentiation of any classroom. Even if you didn't have any students with, say, diagnosed issues, you still have students who, in every single classroom, the need to differentiate and the need to change your planning and change your content and change your structure of your lessons to make sure that you're meeting the needs of all the kids. It can just be things like academic range. Within a grade, in my imaginary grade 4 class that I was talking about with language devices, I would have to imagine that some students are going to be in the year 5 and 6 level, potentially more. There could be some all the way back to prep, and how I would make sure that everyone's learning the same content. I don't want my students who are struggling to then go off and do something completely different. That's not what we want. If the focus of your unit is narratives, you don't say to your struggling group, well, you go off and read a book because you can't do narratives. You still keep your narrative focus. So the focus remains the same. It's just that what narratives look like for someone who's at a prep level and what narratives look like for someone at a 5-6 level, that we're all writing narratives. We've just got different learning goals and different agendas for those particular students. So I teach grade 2-3 at the moment, and we have some students who are working out foundation, and I might to say to some of those students, your goal is to write, a simple sentence that makes sense. Maybe some of the ones that are a little bit behind might start working to blending complex sentences. And then I'd have my quite high group that could start looking at things like show, don't tell, and using some of the rich mentor texts to help them design their own narrative with, really enhanced vocab and stuff like that. So we're all working on a narrative. We don't change the focus and we don't change the content. We just change what each student is doing to cater to their needs at their level. So differentiation means, now within your 5 lessons, all you have to do is just show us little pieces of evidence every now and then that you're changing things up for different kids. So in lesson 1, I want to see some evidence somewhere that you've just considered that there are different kids in the grade and they've got different needs. So for example, with my narrative example, I've got lesson 1, we're focusing on, say, orientation, for example. And I want maybe these particular students are going to work on simple sentences, like I said. So that's an example of arranging the content differently. I haven't changed my content, I've just rearranged it. Look at the content descriptors below yours. Go to that PDF. Go to the Literacy Scope and Sequence PDF. And if you look at where your content descriptor sits, there will be ones below it, unless you're choosing foundation, then there will be no below. But say for a grade 4, I've got the 3, 2, 1 and foundation below, so I can look at what skills have been done already. So I can maybe suggest that some of my lower students are doing some of the skills from grade 1, 2. And then you look at the higher ones and you suggest, again, I'll use some different strategies and different teaching approaches with those particular students. So arranging content differently is a must for differentiation. Now, different teaching approaches. If I have a group of struggling students, what teaching approaches would lend themselves better to that particular group? Maybe those particular students don't have the attention span or don't have the concentration or don't have the skill to do an independent writing for 30 minutes. You can't expect a child who's who can't string a sentence together to write for 30 minutes. That's not an approach that suits that particular need of the child. So suggest something else. If you've got all the rest of the kids writing for 30 minutes, have a little point in your lesson that shows what the struggling students are doing during that time. Are they meeting with you? Are they doing a shared writing? Are they doing an interactive writing? What are they doing that's different, that's catering towards their needs? Maybe you can do, I'm actually going to get to timing in a minute, so I'll come back to that point. Different assessments, perhaps. I'm not quite sure if this is actually, it's just something to consider. So is there a need for a different assessment? So if I'm using a probe assessment comprehension on my grade 5/6s and I have a student who's quite low and I don't want to put them through a probe test for whatever reason, even though they go down to 5 years of age, do I need to change my assessment? Do I need to make it different? Am I just going to do a reading conference with a particular student instead? You know, how can you change your assessment to give you the best information? You might not change assessments. It's just something to consider, and there's not a need to, as long as you've got different content and different teaching approaches shown to us in your unit. Other things that you can do to show us that you're differentiating for students is things like timing. So in my example of different teaching approaches, I said that if I was asking students to write for 30 minutes in an independent writing, some students couldn't cope with that timing. It's just far too long. Some students are frustrated. If I have, perhaps I'm in my grade 4 grade and I have a student working at grade 5/6 level, that student might just be getting on a roll with their writing after 20 minutes, and they might look at you in frustration and think, oh, I just started and now she's stopping me again. So think about timing. Do some students need more time to really get their ideas down? There might be the complete opposite, where some students who are who are working above level might finish something very quickly, and there might be times where the struggling students need more time. So timing is a way of showing us that you're differentiating. The other thing you can do is the flexible grouping. So the groupings of children is another way to show us that you're catering to diverse learners. You've got whole groups, you've got small groups, you've got pairs, you've got buddies. How can you use flexible grouping and changes of grouping? How can you use your assessment to inform your groupings? So maybe if you're doing a narrative unit of, a unit of work on narratives, and you get to lesson 3 and then you have an assessment sort of midway to check in with how kids are going, if you realize that there's 3 or 4 kids that still don't understand narrative structure, well, you're going to go back and reteach those students just in a small group. If you're doing a reading unit and you want to buddy someone up to get some, to reinforce that, listening. Maybe you're doing a unit on fluency and you want some kids to read together. Maybe you want to introduce things and model things as a whole class. So flexible grouping is really important too. Now, number 5 is the structure of the unit, and this is going to be very tricky to talk about, because in the past for this unit we had a structure, we had a template that we were given, and you had to fit in with that. Now there's things that are good about that, because when you're given a template you have to work with it. Something that was bad about that is that I didn't particularly like the template, because I found it quite cumbersome. You had to jump up and down between where your unit objectives were, and it got quite confusing. So it's great this time that we're allowed to choose our own structure of our own unit. So how it's going to look is completely up to you, as long as you're covering the rubric criteria. Now, over the next few weeks, I will look at getting lots of examples for you from different people and contacts that I have. When I'm at school, obviously I've just cut and pasted this out of a bigger unit planner, but just to give you an idea, this is how we structure it at our school. So we're looking at the learning intentions and success criteria. We have some sort of interesting hook. So there has to be some sort of modeling or sharing or whole class introduction, which is the explicit teaching that you're going to do at the beginning of the lesson. We have the middle part of the lesson, which obviously lends to gradual release. and then some sort of ending, some sort of reflection or assessment at the end of the lesson to see how the kids have gone. You can suggest some reflection tools. Because HITS is something that's very important. We also tick off which particular high impact teaching strategy we're using. So there could be things like, well, obviously we're all showing differentiated teaching, but things like there could be collaborative learning in this particular lesson. Are the kids looking? Worked examples are amazing. Maybe in the hook of your lesson, you've got an example of how you want the kids to structure their narrative. So they're looking at a worked example so that when they come to doing their own writing, they've got something to base it off. Having multiple exposures to the same sort of content. Just a bit of a tip. I know that this has gone a little bit over time, but you don't want to get to lesson 5 and have the kids writing for the first time. I found that was really interesting last time when I went to mark assignments. We'd have students suggesting, start lesson 1 by doing this particular skill, and lesson 2 this particular skill, lesson 3 skills, 4 skills, and then in lesson 5 they're going to write their narrative. And I thought, out of 5-week unit, they've only written a narrative once. Let's get them writing at lots of points in the unit so that we have lots of samples at the end to work from and edit, and the kids can get feedback on their own writing. Feedback's super important in your unit. Now, again, very, very big topics. We can't cover them all here now, but structure of the unit, I promise that we will give you lots of examples so you can have a look at over the next few weeks. All right, so the rubric's really important. It's got some things like aligning to the Australian curriculum, aligning your content descriptors, and please don't forget about diverse learners. Now, I'm going to leave it here because I promised to try and keep to half an hour. As I said, in the interactive collab, that's going to be super important that you listen back to the recording if you can't make it, because we'll talk about specific examples. Great, hope it helps.